This has been a collaboration between the University of Glasgow, but also the Technical University of Darmstadt and the Leibniz University of Hannover. And our work is called Investigating State-of-the-Art Practices for Fostering Subjective Trust in Online Voting through Interviews. So I am here at the security conference. I guess most of you know how online voting works. Let me quickly recap it. We have a voter, they have their voting decision, and they use some kind of system, so for instance their laptop or their smartphone, to cast a vote. This is then sent online to a ballot box server where it is stored until the end of the election, and then it is tallied, and we can announce the result. And again, I know I'm at a security conference, there are so many things that could go wrong during that process, but just for a second, let's assume we would be in a perfect world. We would have a system that is secure, usable, and really easy to understand. And now, in this perfect world, what could be still a problem? So what could lead people to not using our system? That is subjective trust. So if voters don't trust the voting system, some components of it, like the voting software on their devices, the server, that means they also wouldn't trust the result. And if the voters won't trust the result, we basically can trash our elections and we don't have to do them in the first place. So the subjective trust of voters is a key component in online voting. And here I would like to say the subjective trust is really different from these trust assumptions that we are making and computationally trust scores. So in my research, we investigated measures that the authorities can do to help voters determine their subjective trust. We investigated the research question, how the state-of-the-art practices that aim to help voters determine their subjective trust indeed impact the voters' trust. Perceptions, so there's a lot of trust in the questions and perceptions, I know. So first we did a literature review to find 9 practices to foster trust. I'm not going to explain them right now, but I will explain them when I present the results. We looked at the scientific literature, so in scientific databases, but we also looked at the official documentation from different countries that did online elections before, or they did online voting trials, or currently introducing voting. This was really important because, as you can see, as a support service for voters is something that we wouldn't have found in the literature. We investigated the trust practices in an interview study with 26 participants. We first welcomed them, asked them for their consent, then we asked them for their voting experiences to also make sure that our participants have a consistent voting experience. Because it's a German sample, we don't have any online voting experiences in politically binding elections, but they have participated in various elections like for their city council or for the German government. Next, we familiarized them a bit with online voting by presenting them a system that we chose from related work and also explained components of the system to them. And finally, that was the longest part of the interview, we talked to them about the practices. How does a specific practice impact their subjective trust? Have they heard about this practice from another domain before? And also, why does it impact the trust? And when we analyzed our results, we found 4 trust clusters, so 4 categories how these practices impact subjective trust. The first one we called mandatory practices. Those are practices where the voter said, if that's not the case for an election, I wouldn't participate at all. And this was true for expert evaluations, so we have some trusted experts like us, or some authority that would evaluate the source code. And the second mandatory practice were media information campaigns in the form of TV or radio spots, but also online, where voters could independently inform about the voting system. The second cluster is given by methods that enhance trust, but it's not necessary for voters to participate in the election. Here we had trial elections, so we used the online voting system in a fake election before, or we have the possibility to access a demo system without having to give our credentials, and we can just, familiarize with the voting system. The support service for voters that is used in Switzerland, that's like you can call a hotline when you need some kind of help. That was also really welcomed, and individual verifiability. This is something that has been heavily discussed by our community, and that means that voters have the possibility to verify that the vote is stored in the ballot box from them indeed corresponds to what they wanted to vote for. Next, we have it's a bit difficult to explain, like neutral practices. Here we had like interesting divisions between like different participants. Here we have open source disclosure of the source code. Here people unfortunately had a lot of misconceptions. So we had a bunch of computer scientists, but we also had non-experts. And the non-experts mainly thought that disclosing the source code publicly makes new like attack vectors possible, and it makes it easier to attack the voting system, which is totally no different from the way we would we would judge that measure. The second one was eID authentication, how it is used in Estonia. So instead of like anonymous credentials in form of a username or password that cannot be linked to a person, the idea is to have a document for a strong eligibility check. But here the participants were also a bit divided and said, like, if we are not using anonymous credentials or have a clear separation, how can we make sure that vote privacy here can be kept? And finally, we have negative measures, as you probably would have expected, and that means if that is used, people would probably also abstain from the election and not use the voting system at all. Here we had different independent implementations. That would mean the authorities would publish the source code, and I don't know, CISPA in Germany, the University of Hannover, they could implement different voting clients, and I could choose the one I'm trusting the most. Here participants feared to have fake voting software that could spy on them or get their credentials and cast a vote on their behalf. And last but not least, we have vote updating. That means until the very end of the election, you could update your vote. The idea is that it can mitigate coercion. So if someone coerces me to cast a vote for a specific party, I could just do that and log in later as long as the election hasn't closed. So there's like a little limitation, and then it just casts another vote. And here people said, this is so different from the paper process in Germany, and so they really didn't like that. And of course, I referred to the paper. We also found a bunch of new practices like political role models, social media, and secure hardware. And the misconceptions there are presented in a little bit more depth. So what are the key takeaways from our study? First of all, these mandatory practices are well known from other domains. Expert evaluations and also media campaigns is something we know from our daily life. And so maybe we can leverage this to enhance other practices. Neutral and negative practices need like additional effort, so you can't just publish the source code and just say, okay, voters deal with it. So we can combine practices to be like beneficial, and this has been done in Switzerland. So they now have a bounty hunting program, so they publish the code open source, and you can look for vulnerabilities, and I strongly encourage you all to do that. You can win a lot of money actually. And finally, we thought that at least when you're introducing online voting in the beginning, it should be really similar to in-person voting in terms of vote updating and other procedures. So let me conclude. Voter trust is crucial in all kinds of elections actually, and practices that aim to enhance trust can actually decrease trust. So we need to leverage known practices from other domains to enhance that situation. And yeah, I'm done, and I'm happy to answer your questions.